Hey guys, this is Bob Marlette here. I'd really love it if you listened to Nothing Shocking podcast. You'll love it.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host Jeff Untied, and with me in Dogbowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers, like our Facebook page, or follow us on Twitter at NoShockPod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Bob Marlette, a legendary producer.
and the likes of Tony Iommi,
Black Sabbath, Lynyrd Skynyrd,
Rob Halford, Marilyn Manson,
Alice Cooper.
Yeah, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
Great interview. Let's get to it.
All right, good night.
Good night.
As 2023 is coming to a close, we've had a fantastic year here on the Nothing Shocking podcast. Hope you've enjoyed the variety of episodes we've shared with you. Wishing everyone a happy holidays and blessings in the new year.
Bob, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce you, my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Bob, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, gentlemen. My pleasure.
Well, thank you for your willingness to participate. I know I've been bugging you, a better part of a year now to get you on the podcast, and you finally submitted. We're so happy to have you.
Well, at least you're consistent. So it's all good. It's all good. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're excited. So let's get right into this. So go back a little bit into your history here. You were born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska. Can you talk a little bit more about those formative years, starting out as a young musician in the Midwest?
I always tell people I was so blessed. I mean, I had such a great childhood. My parents were so, wonderfully supportive of my music and my desire to make music. My mom, used to drive me to shows when I was like way too young to be playing clubs. My mom would take me there. I started playing clubs when I was probably 14 or so, and my mom would literally drive me to these places and then sit at the back and just sort of watch me. So, and that continued on. I actually left home fairly early. I wasn't quite 18. I was still 17 when a band came through. Well, it wasn't a band yet. It was a singer and a bass player. The bass player, you guys now know him as Rudy Sarzo from Ozzy and Whitesnake and Quiet Riot. The singer and Rudy came through town and were like, "Hey, you want to put a band together?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So I always say the early version of Quiet Riot was actually put together in my parents' basement in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Nice.
Which is pretty funny. And Rudy, we always talk about that he used to sleep on the couch in the basement, and he spent a lot of time down there. So,
Oh, so cool.
So,
yeah.
Mostly I was like, I was so blessed that I was, my parents were so, understanding of that. Because in the 70s in Nebraska, that wasn't really the
Oh, yeah.
like it wasn't that oh yeah, let my son be a musician, so.
Very good.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that transition from being a musician into being a session player or session musician?
Well, so what had happened, I was like the band with Rudy and eventually then Frankie Bonelli joined the band, and so we toured for about probably 2.5 years or so. And then one day we woke up and said, you know what, we got to go to LA. We got to make this happen.
Yeah.
So we borrowed my dad was kind enough to give me his gold Plymouth station wagon. And we rented a U-Haul and took all our gear and moved to LA. And so when we got there, it started out more as I was just, it's still in the band mentality. And then basically, the concept was always whenever somebody would ask me, hey man, could you come, play on our demo or whatever? I'm like, sure, no problem, whatever. And so it went from just, essentially, I always said the key to success is when the phone rang, you answered it and said yes. Didn't matter what it was. So I just started out playing little demos, and then pretty soon, when those bands and artists eventually started making records, I just started getting calls, to come in as a player and play on those records. So.
Oh, very good.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, that was, the glory days of back then. It was really a lot of fun.
Well, I guess maybe this might be a difficult question to ask, but as far as, a mindset of a musician as such as yourself, you're in a band, but then you're also getting called out to do sessions. As far as getting into the studio, when it comes to doing something like that, is being a part of a band and then being a session artist. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how the mentality goes of, hey, I'm doing my own music to now I'm doing somebody else's music? Is the motivation still the same?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, it's like I was as much as I love being on stage, because I mean that was like probably the single biggest transition for me happened when they were having calls out for auditions for Al Stewart. Al Stewart was the artist, did Year of the Cat and Time Passages and huge hits back in the late 70s. And I got that gig. I went and auditioned, and I actually got the gig. And I was like, oh, this is cool. But you have to understand, I've been writing songs, and, so even whether I was in a band or whether I was, doing sessions, I was always writing songs for other people too. So a lot of times the sessions I did were songs that I had written. So, but to me, it really didn't matter because I just loved the studio. And like I said, as much as I love being, on the stage and then subsequently the big stage, I love being on the big stage and stuff, but I always loved the studio more than anything. That was my real true love, was the second I got in the studio. And there's a lot of people that will tell you that the main reason why I loved the studio, I was kind of a control freak, that live, you couldn't control it. Right. It's like, oh man, we'd make a mistake or something. And it's like, in the studio, it's like, yeah, let's do that again. Let's do it again and again. And, it's like until I got it exactly how I wanted it, So it was, almost everything in my career has been sort of, as I look back on it, sort of natural progressions. It was all things that would just one thing would lead to another thing to another thing.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your producer hat. When you're in the studio working with bands, over the years, how hard was it to just keep them reined in and on task and get that album done, or any stories of that nature?
Well, producing, literally was born out of doing sessions and such, because as when I would do a session for another producer, a lot of times what was happening is the producer knew if they called me, number one, I'd be able to, sort of fix their song or help the arrangement or whatever. So, and I started getting, those calls more for that. And then I realized, well, wait a second. I'm essentially doing the job of the producer. Shouldn't I be sitting in that chair? So I transitioned into producing more, and that was really where I belonged, honestly, because it allowed me to play, to write songs, to arrange, to engineer, to all of the aspects, mix everything. And that was like the true love and passion for me, was being able to do, either everything or just simply sit back and guide the scenario. Because some bands, it's like, I needed to be able to have the space to be able to just hold the band together from, falling into space, which definitely would, some artists would definitely do that, So there's, every band's a little different, I tell you one thing, here's something, like some people know and not everybody knows, but I'm actually one of those kind of odd ducks that I have never been drunk in my life. And I never really did drugs. That was never my thing. I just didn't, and people will say, oh man, that's so cool. It's like, no, it's like telling somebody that hates Brussels sprouts, hey man, congratulations, you don't eat Brussels sprouts. Yeah. Well, I hate Brussels sprouts. I don't want to, and so that's, my thing with drugs and alcohol. I just never got. So I was always the guy who was focused and goal driven. So that always helped me with dealing with artists that, I understood early on that one of the most important things, with artists was understanding the artist's psyche, is understanding really what that was about. Yeah. That, and it was one of the things that I always said, it's like, you're a good portion of being a good producer is, being aware enough of, like sort of therapy, if you will, so you understand how can I help the artist, break through the walls that they set up for themselves. And so that was, always a big thing for me, is understanding how to create an environment that made it fun and safe. Because, I'm not, that's one of the things in the studio. I'm never really a dictator. Yes, I get what I want, but I always make sure that I do it with enough humor and love and nurturing that it just, it's not punishment,
Well, to add on to that, your work as a session artist, you played with some big egos, and obviously as a producer, you produced some big egos. How did that evolution of session musician into producing, how did it shape you as a producer to take on those big personalities and those big albums that are at task?
That's a great question, because I think that's one of the things that I carried into producing was through watching other producers fuck shit up,
Yeah.
Excuse my French. But it's like watching how producers would create drama where there needed to not be drama, and created tension and all that kind of stuff. So it's like it helped me by witnessing what I don't want to do when I get into the chair, and that was always a big thing, because that, I'll give you an example of that, is that in the studio, in the actual studio system, there's always, it's essentially engineers start out by being, what in the English world, you'd start out being the T-boy. The T-boy was the guy that would always get, a cup of tea for anybody. And then from that, you'd transition into an assistant engineer, or tape op / assistant engineer. And then, but the problem is that so many engineers would just brutalize these poor guys, because it was, some thought it was it was their responsibility to toughen them up and all that kind of stuff. But more times than not, I saw it as sort of punitive. It was like, okay, I was punished, so I'm going to punish you, And so I was never really a fan of that mentality. And for me, it was more of a case of it's like I always got the most out of all the assistants and stuff, because I tried to always create an example of, camaraderie and just, and a good relationship, because I found out ultimately, if you were that nice and that cool to the, people coming up, they would work so hard to never let you down, that you were getting their absolute best all the time, versus the guy that was just sitting there looking at you go, you motherfucker. It's like, so I just found the other technique to be more, for me, more appropriate. But part of it, though, is understand I didn't actually come up as an assistant engineer, and I never got really brutalized, because when I really started coming into my own in the studio, I was coming in as a featured player or a songwriter or whatever. So it wasn't like the engineer could look over at me and sort of punish me or demean me. So.
Yeah, very good. I guess maybe this might be a difficult question, but for you, how do you view yourself in the now? Are you the producer that was once a recording artist / session musician, or are you still that musician that has now become a producer? I guess what hat fits you the best now?
To me, it's always been stream of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. My process I've never really separated things out. So I've always viewed myself, as a producer who wrote songs, played, engineered, arranged, it's like, I've always just looked at myself as a guy who just loved every process, every bit of the process. So to me, it was just all really, like I said, stream of consciousness, because, I'm asked all the time about, like, when you're in the studio and you're engineering and you're writing and you're doing all this stuff. And it's like, but in my mind, it's all just one thing. I'm just making music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just creating records, right? So in my mind, it's like when I'm writing concept
Mm-hmm.
of what I want that song to be, that starts right from the inception of writing the song. In other words, when I'm writing the song, I'm thinking, oh, I could use this kind of guitar tone. And then, oh, when the drums come in here, they'll be like, real small, cool drums or huge. But it's like, it's all just sort of built together. And then the engineering is just simply facilitating the idea that I have. So it isn't, I don't actually separate it out in my mind. It's all the same thing. It's all just creating music and, just visualizing, from the get-go, it's visualizing the final outcome and just being able to facilitate the final outcome.
Very good.
Yeah, let's dive in here. Like, you have so many artists that you work with, it's hard to figure out where to start. But I wanted to ask you about Blackstone Cherry.
But sorry, hold on one second, because I want to just interject something to this, because what you just said was probably what I love about my career the most. That if you just take a look at the discography and you just look at all these, just such a wide, it's like wide variety of artists. And that's what I've loved about my career, that I could go from Tracy Chapman, Wilson Phillips, to Black Sabbath, to Marilyn Manson, to Sheryl Crow, to, it's like that to me has been, one of my like things that I've loved the most, that I could be able to, because that's one of the things that a lot of times because I love, speaking at, music schools and universities and stuff. I love that when a kid will ask me, it's like, hey, how could you go from doing, Tracy Chapman to Black Sabbath? And I'm like, well, because it's all music. And really, my job as a producer is to be able to facilitate the relationship between the artist and the audience, is finding out what does the artist want to say and make sure that I deliver to the audience the communication between those two entities that allows them to connect with the artist, and conversely, back and forth.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on, Blackstone Cherry.
That's awesome, because that's very much what we're trying to do with this podcast.
Exactly.
We're trying to get a wide variety of artists and connect the artists to the fans. That's awesome.
Love that.
Blackstone Cherry, I'm a recent fan of theirs. I just kind of discovered them. I mean, they've been around a long time, but that album Kentucky was from 2016 was actually the first album I bought by them. Can you talk a little bit about your contributions to that album?
So Blackstone Cherry, I love those guys. I had so much fun working with those dudes, and it was sort of, kind of one of those weird out of the blue records that this, I get a call. It's very, and I love this phone call. The very first phone call I got was from the drummer's dad.
Yeah.
Okay. He was the guitar player in Kentucky Headhunters.
Yep.
Right. And his uncle, which by the way is one of my all-time favorite stories, about when we were first, like probably the first day of pre-pro, we're at their band house. They had like a band. When I say house, it's a shack in the hills of Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're driving me to this place, and I'm like, I'm like, oh my God, it's Deliverance, right? So we're driving to this place, and we get there, and we get into the room, and they're they're just these young kids, but they're so badass. They're so just like, God, you guys are great, right? So at one point I go, hey, I got to take a pee. Where's the bathroom? And he said, well, you go out onto the front porch and you turn right or you turn left.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? You just go to either side of the porch and pee, and it's like, and then they would like, yeah, if you got to do anything more than that, we got to drive down to my dad's house, right? I'm like, okay. So I'm like standing, I finished my, my pee, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I see this old time tractor with this guy driving this tractor, right? Like, but coming up the road, right? He's got one of the, it's like giant mutton chop things that hang down to his waist, his like beard kind of thing. And he's got one of those old, farmer hat kind of things with the ear flops over the side. And he parks his tractor and comes up and he looks over at me, goes, hey, you must be that fella producer from LA. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Right. So he like come, it's like, yeah, I'm Bob. And it's like, hey, how are you? And he comes in and he kind of goes, he goes to the drummer, John Fred, how's that snare holding up for you? And I'm like, what's going on here? And then, John Fred's sort of like, I don't know, it's losing a little track on this. Let's, he's, well, let me take a look. He sits down and just starts shredding. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the Twilight Zone, right? well, it turns out it's Fred Young, the drummer from Tech, who would play the double bass kid and the huge, Bonhamy thing. And it's just like crazy badass drummer. And like, so right from the get-go, that just set the tone of the whole thing. And then, and a lot of the writing that we did together on, what was that, Superstition? And I forget the name of it. Like, right there's the downside of doing too many records. It's like, hell, I can't even remember the name of it. But I remember vividly, sort of creatively the magic that was happening, because we just, it's like, and it was because of that we started going, oh, let's try this and we could do this. And that's a great thing about working with bands like those guys that are such great players that, whatever idea that I could come up with, they could play, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of records where, it's like, I'd here, try playing this. And the guy would look at me like, I got nothing. I'm like, Jesus, it's like, so, but I was very blessed working with those guys because they were so talented and fun. And, I'm still in touch with those guys. I love them. So.
Oh, fantastic.
Nice. Good guys too. Very good guys.
So your producing career really took off in the early 90s. Your working relationship with John Five kind of opened the door to work with David Lee Roth, I believe, and Rob Halford. Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with John Five?
John and I have been like best buds since the early 90s, because the interesting way we sort of met was Rudy, my good buddy Rudy Sarzo, obviously about the old days, but Rudy had, after he finished with Whitesnake, put his own band together, right? And called me up and said, hey man, can you, come down and, help us out and, see what we can get happening here. So I came down and, met with the band, and John was playing guitar with them. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, I walk in, I sit down, we start talking, and like all of a sudden John starts playing. Right. And I'm like, oh my God, this, it's like he'd had these, really huge bell-bottom pants on, never wore a shirt, just completely skin and bones, tattooed, like his whole like upper body completely tattooed with the blonde hair flying around. And I was like, oh my God, it's like, and I literally was like, hey, why don't you come with me? So I stole him out of that band and I started working with him. And the first thing we did was we created this band with this singer, Mark Binder, a great industrial hardcore singer, really cool. And that was the first thing we did. And we never looked back. We've been making records and working together, for 30 plus years now. So
yeah, very good.
He's like I said, he's been one of my best friends for so long. And he's just like, so, the other thing I will say this about John, the thing that I loved about him, he was just so singularly myopic that it was the guitar.
Yeah.
That was the beginning and ending of his universe, right? And like, when I'd have him come play on other stuff, he would just always be the most prepared, totally ready to go guy, but it wasn't just playing. He understood his role as a guitar hero. He understood how to look the part, play the part, be the part, and I use him all the time as examples to other bands and musicians coming up. It's like, it's about owning it, being so good and owning it. Like, and the example I use is like, if you were at 7-Eleven and you saw John at 7-Eleven, you would literally go, oh my, because he'd be standing there in a full length fur coat with just, no shirt on and tattooed and, so yeah, he was epic. Hold on one second. Just so you know, my brilliant son, Christopher Marlette, who actually has been he's been working with me now for about 10 years now. And he's I'm doing a podcast here. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. He goes, aren't you cool? It's like, but yes, I am, my son.
Of course, indubitably.
Yeah, indubitably. Okay, we'll talk later. He came and gave me the look like, what are you doing? So
very good.
Yeah, he's luckily my son's every bit as talented as me, maybe even more so. He's just got the gift. So it's nice when your kid is actually that talented, and just, it's just sort of so natural at it.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm a blessed man beyond belief. I've lived a charmed life. I'm married to the most amazing woman, and life is pretty darn good for me. It's hard to complain much,
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Jeff, you got the next one?
Well, I was just going to lead into that from talking about John 5 to did that relationship have anything to do with getting you in with Lynyrd Skynyrd and Gods and Guns album, or can you talk a little bit about?
Actually, yeah, that did, because John, the Skynyrd guys, they wanted to write with John, and so they did some writing together, and John was like, why you should be using Bob Marlette to do your next record, right? And so that kind of out of nowhere, I get the call from the Skynyrd guys like, hey, you want to do a record with us? And I'm like, okay, I didn't see that coming, but I'm in.
Yeah.
It's like, that sounds like fun. Then I ended up doing a couple of records with those guys and had an absolute blast. Those guys are just iconic, fun thing. They just were the best. And we had such fun making those records. It was such a good time.
Well, not to change the subject here, but you are the producer on two of my most favorite albums in the world, the Iommi self-titled album and the Iommi Glenn Hughes Fused album.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that album creation in the studio, working with two icons in the world of rock and roll and heavy metal.
I think, actually what had happened was I had agreed to do a record with Rob Halford, which ended up being the Two Voyeurs record.
Yeah.
And with John, and John was on that too. Now, let me put a quick disclaimer on that one, because that record, and don't get me wrong, I love Trent Reznor, but you should have, if you get a chance, see if you can find on YouTube the original mixes of that record before Trent got his hands on it. Because we had literally finished that entire record, and then we went shopping for a deal afterwards. And, some of that was my fault because I was really promoting getting it signed with Interscope. And then when Trent was like interested in it, I was like, yes, that's the perfect label for this. But, and then again, it's like, don't get me wrong, I respect and love Trent. He's an amazing, amazing talent. But he kind of lightened the record up and made it a little bit more electronica versus what the original record was, which was way like heavier and darker and more badass. And so that's why I always tell people, see if you can find the original mixes. I think they're on YouTube. It's like, and I wish I could, guide everybody to where to find it other than YouTube. But anyway, the original mixes were amazing. But the reason why I bring Rob up is because when we had started working on that record, Rob, actually it was Tony, Ralph Baker, who was managing Tony at the time, had reached out to Rob to maybe talk about doing a record together, and doing like a Black Sabbathy or a New Entity kind of thing. And so I had known Tony just a little bit before that, and so it was that was a pretty iconic meeting. It was Rob Halford, Tony Iommi, and myself having lunch at the Cheesecake Factory. And and it's one of those things, had anybody ever seen us, they probably would have shit themselves. It's like, dude, look at that table. So we had lunch and we talked about doing this record. And the problem is that, Rob at that point was sort of, he wanted really to do the 2/Voyeurs thing. And so we kept it separate. But then Tony had said, well, if that's the case, then why don't you come and do a record with me? And I'm like, absolutely. Because I obviously, hello, Tony Iommi,
Yeah.
So I'm like, sure, let me do this. Right. So, so it started out that that first, the actual Tony Iommi's solo record started out, we were looking to find the perfect singer to pair up with Tony. And, it's like my thing in those initial conversations was, what I didn't want to happen was I didn't want it to be, like a solo record with just another kind of like faceless English rock singer.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to, you know, to give it the iconic nature that Tony is, right? So then we sort of started thinking, it was like, well, and then I had sort of suggested, like, well, why don't we just get a bunch of different singers that are all like the coolest dudes, right? Mm-hmm. So then I sort of suggested, well, let's get like Dave Grohl and, you know, all these different people, and, you know, Billy Corrigan, and so that just sort of started materializing, and I was like, fuck, dude, this is so cool. I love this idea of getting all these different people, right? So that record actually took quite a while to make, because the other thing that happened while we were making that record was Ozzy. Well, Sharon and Ozzy had reached out to Tony, and they were like, okay, let's bury the hatchet here and just sort of, you know, let's do this again, because there's such a demand for the original Sabbath guys, right? So that's how I ended up, you know, producing the Sabbath reunion record with Ozzy. So, but we were still making the Iommi record the entire time while the Sabbath record was being made. So it's just sort of like everything going on, you know, at the same time. But it was just so, for me, it was just, you know, and here's one of those rock and roll stories that has always sort of totally stayed with me, was when we were working on the track with Dave Grohl, what's the name of that?
Goodbye Lament.
Goodbye Lament. Goodbye Lament. And so, okay, so this was before we had gotten Dave to, you know, commit to working on that song. Tony and I had written the music together, and Tony was like, oh, we should get one of my really good friends, Brian May, to play on it. I'm like, fuck. You know, it's like, yes, let's get Brian May, right? So we, so basically, there was one particular day we were tracking the song at Henson Studios in LA, in Hollywood. It used to be the old A&M Studios that became Henson Studios, right? And we were in the studio, and it was like, I was sitting at the console, and in the control room with me, on one side, I had Brian May standing there.
Nice.
On the other side, I had Tony Iommi standing there. And then we had Matt Cameron out playing drums.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it was one of those moments, you know, it's like, I just kept thinking to myself, don't they realize I'm just a kid from Nebraska? You know, it's like, you know how the reality of the moment was just like, oh my God, this is insane, right? And it was just so much fun, and it was just so creative, and the entire process of the record was just such a blast. I just so thoroughly loved working with Tony, and Tony and I, you know, became so close working on that, because, you know, one of the things I loved about it was I sort of got to be, I sort of got to become in Tony's world, and, you know, sort of writing songs with him, and, you know, and because I will say this, that one of the things that I've been blessed beyond belief with is my ability to sort of become a chameleon. So whatever artist I'm working with, I sort of become that. And so for that period of time, you know, it's like, I mean, it was sort of back to back from Halford, then Iommi, then Black Sabbath. And it was like, wow, this is pretty cool, you know? So
very cool.
yeah.
Cool.
Well, you
pretty
might have answered my question already, because I was going to ask you about the Brian May on there, but my question was going to be about, you know, how much of the album was done in the studio versus, you know, a lot of times as a fan you dream and you imagine that the songs are all done in the studio, and then you find out later that everybody mailed their tracks in, you know.
No, there had to be some of that,
Yeah.
just simply because we had a gazillion people working on the record.
Yeah.
You know, and so nobody back then, there was no mailing it in, but there were a lot of things that were done like sort of one or two people at a time, right?
Yeah.
Like we had like there was one session with the and I'm so sorry, I've forgotten her name. The singer on, was it Skin? There was a song that John Tempesto played on. He played drums on the song, but we were actually tracked that song at Longview Farms in the western part of Massachusetts. Like, and then we went to London and put her on, put her vocals on in London, so that was kind of part of the fun of making that record, is that, we were sort of going all over the world, just, getting people to come in and put their little stamp on it. And it was, I had such a great time making that record. It was difficult because, there wasn't just a band that you just sort of focused on and said, okay, we're just, we're sitting here. Okay, you play this. It was like every song had totally different people playing on it. And, it was just completely, just sort of mayhem, but it was so great. So fun.
Yeah. I think the song was called Meat.
Okay, cool. Sorry. I'm not kidding. That's one of the hardest things about, doing stuff like this. It's like when I start getting, asked, like, dude, what snare did you use on the song from 1986? But it's like, are you kidding me? It's like, dude, I can't remember what show I watched yesterday on Netflix.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I did want to talk a little bit about the Fused album with Glenn Hughes and Iommi. Can you talk a little bit about more getting in the studio with Glenn Hughes and those massive vocals that he has?
Yeah. Okay. So that record. So the thing that was so cool about that actually was a record where we were all at a place called Mono Valley Studios, right, in Monmouth, Wales. And it was a residential, it was sort of the sister studio to Rockfield, the very famous, where Queen did their records. And it was this place in Wales and it was one of those studios that, you all lived on the, it was just like it was like a resort, and we all lived there, and then the studio was right there. So you'd wake up, everybody'd have breakfast together, hang out and talk about, and then we'd all pile into the studio and just make music all day. And then, at night we'd all just hang out and shoot the shit all night. And it was just, it was just an absolute pleasure. And it's so funny because Glenn is such an absolute character, right? And so it took me a while to sort of figure out Glenn. Okay, so because I had always known of how amazing he was, but it was sort of took me a while to figure out, okay, how do I sort of focus Glenn on this record and make that connect, because he's so talented and he's got his brain is so active and all over the place that it's like that was probably the biggest challenge of that record, was focusing Glenn to say, okay, here we go, we're over here, And here's, because we literally wrote that, that record together. Tony, Glenn, and myself sort of wrote the record together, like as we were going. Nice. It all just sort of was, we all just, it's like when you get talented people and you just all get in the room, it's just such a blast, because, and it didn't hurt that we had Kenny Aronoff playing drums on that record. And, Kenny and I have also been friends for 30 plus years, and so that was just, such a pleasurable, wonderful, great time.
Oh,
so
fantastic. I got to tell you, that album is a banger.
Yeah.
And I still, to this day, listen to it religiously.
Oh, yeah, it's one of our favorites. Yeah.
I love that. Because, again, that's one of those things that, like, that record to me is I know how many people really dig that, but to me that, whereas the Iommi record was one more that I sort of made the visceral connection with, I think the Fused record was a little bit more like, oh yeah, I have to work at this, to get it focused and make sense. Whereas the Iommi record was, I really just felt like it was such a, it was a labor of love where I got to, really have fun with so many great artists. Yeah,
very good.
But I'm just, but again, though, that's the beauty. I always say this about making records is that the people tell us whether we got it right or not. People let us know, because trust me, I've worked on some records where it's like, yeah, this is never going to do anything. I don't think it's that great. And then it sells millions of records, right?
Yeah.
And then other records where I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. And it crickets. Yeah. It's like crickets. Yeah. So actually, funny enough, it's like I made a record in, I think it was 99 or 2000. It was a band called Square. Okay. It was James Valentine, the guitar player from Maroon 5, Ryland Steen, the drummer that ended up in Real Big Fish, and a keyboard player, singer, Sean Bestie, just ridiculous talent guy, right? And we just made this record, and it was so far ahead of its time, and it was brilliant. And I still, everybody that hears it nowadays goes crazy over it, but it was literally about 20 years ahead of its time. And that was one of my favorite all-time records that I've ever made. And it was literally sold, I don't know, gotta be maybe 15 or 20 copies, I mean, it was just nothing, but it didn't help that, there was some inner band shenanigans, and then the band broke up before we sort of released it, even though the band had actually broke up, and we never found the right label for it. So, but shit happens.
Oh yeah. Time for a re-release.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why, every time I get a chance, I'm like, hey, go check, because you can get it on Spotify.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah. Square is the name of the band, and it's well worth the listen. And, like I said, it's just like, because part of the thing that I loved so much about that record was that, so being from Nebraska, it's not like a huge, Nebraska's not known for its, they're known for football players. They're not known for great musicians. And, although there's been really some great people that come from Nebraska. So I've always, I always had this thing of like any band or, it's like anybody just like from Nebraska that is like halfway decent, let me know. And I'll bring you out to LA and we'll make a record. And that's what happened with Square, was those guys went to the same high school that I did.
Oh, cool.
And Lincoln Southeast High School, they all graduated from there, unlike myself, who didn't actually graduate, because I was like, I got to go. So, but they all, it's like, and it was like yeah, this is great. Because I actually flew back to Lincoln to see him play some shows, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Because when you hear the record, it's like that's what they were live, and they were a three-piece. It was the most amazing thing you'd ever seen, you know. But there you go. It happened. So,
Yeah. Well, I know the state.
I digress.
Yeah. Well, I know the state of the music industry is kind of, not what it used to be, but people are starting to make records at home and stuff. But are you working on anything right now? Do you got anything in the works?
Mostly, I'm working on my tan right now.
Yeah.
I'm just like, it's funny because I was sitting earlier today, and my wife and I were out sitting in the cabana and chilling, and she goes, "Are you okay not working so much anymore?" I got this big smile on my face, and I'm like, I'm so okay with that. It's like, but really what it is a lot of my sort of priorities have changed, right? Because one of the things that I'm really invested in right now is working with kids, especially, underserved communities where kids wouldn't get the opportunity to, get a shot at it. And so one of the things that I do is my wife and I don't know whether you know this, but my wife is she's the singer in No Small Children. They did, the Melissa McCarthy Ghostbusters remake. She did the entitled cover of Ghostbusters.
Oh, cool.
And then she also has done a bunch of film and TV as well as, touring and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that we do is we teach at a summer music, program in Boston called Summer Stars, and it's like it's all donor driven, and kids don't pay a cent, and the kids come from New York and New Jersey and Boston, and it's primarily underserved kids that would never have the opportunity, and that's become a real thing for me at this point in my life because, kind of now I've literally been there and done that. I've lived the dream. I've been to the top of the mountain multiple times, and it's like, thank you very much. And now it's time for me to put back in, to the well that I've drank from so much. And so that's, I love doing that with the kids. And so one of the things that we're talking about doing right now is we're going to actually create a production company / label for this development of kids that wouldn't get a shot at it, so that's become one of my big obsessions now. So
fantastic.
But it's not to say that I'm still making records, but I'm just not like whereas I used to be, obsessed about working all the time. I'm way more selective now. It's like I gotta like, yeah, okay, this is a record that I really want to spend, the next month and a half or 2 months obsessing over. I gotta feel so committed to working with an artist that I'm in that headspace.
Very good. We're out of our allotted time this evening. Is there anything that we left off tonight that you would like to promote or plug?
Not really. I mean, like I said, I'm so lucky that I've been able to, to make all these records and have, such an amazing run that it's like, it's given me so much joy and happiness to be able to bring, music to so many people. It just, because there's sometimes I literally just pinch myself, and it's funny because, it's like sometimes I'll, very rarely, but occasionally I'll look at a royalty statement, and I'm like, dude, I'm huge in Norway, it's like, and I'm like, how cool is that? It's like, I just love being able to make music for the world, and it just gives me endless joy. And so as I, because I'm 68 now, and it's like, as I sort of creep into the, to these senior years, I'm like, you know what? I cannot complain. I cannot complain.
That is fantastic. Well, this is how things are going to work out. We're about 3 weeks behind on our episodes, but once yours is ready to go, Jeff, the editing wizard over here, will clear up all of my boogers tonight. And then once it's all done, we'll send it to you, and please share it wherever you possibly can.
I will, most definitely. And thanks for letting me chit-chat with you guys.
Yeah, this was fun.
Bob, thank you so much. It was a true honor to have you on tonight.
It was my pleasure, gentlemen. And let me know if you need me to do it in the future, because like I said, I love doing stuff like this. It's all good.
I know. We got bands we haven't even talked about yet.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm going to be the squeaky wheel with you over the years now, because I'm going to say, hey, how about this album? Let's talk about this album and that album. Sound good?
It's so funny because you missed out on entire sections, like the Shine Down, See Their Saliva period, and there's so many different periods of my life to chit chat about. So anytime, just let me know.
Hey, fantastic! Happy holidays to you,
and happy recent birthday.
Yeah, happy recent birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys.
Absolutely.
All right, happy holidays to you, and we'll talk soon.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts.